we're excited today to have Shannon Westlake. Shannon is currently the Assistant Project Coordinator and Engagement Coordinator for the Strategic Conservation Assessment of Gulf Coast Landscapes project based in Lexington, Kentucky. She is a conservation social scientist and has assisted private landholders, state and federal personnel, and nonprofit organizations with their real-time conservation efforts. Shannon is also a Xerces ambassador and has been working and volunteering in the pollinator conservation space for the past 8 years. Her PhD work at Mississippi State University was focused on the topic she will be presenting on today. So with that, thank you so much, Shannon, for being here today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I will pass it off to you.
Great, thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. While I'm grateful to connect with a larger amount of you by doing this presentation virtually, I recognize and currently feel the burnout from being on the computer all the time, and I would greatly prefer to do this in person. So I just wanted to thank you again for being here and sharing your valuable time and energy as I get to share about one of my loves, human dimensions of pollinator conservation. Here's a little roadmap of what I'll be covering today. I will start with touching on some pollinators and the issues they are facing, then move on to talking about why we should all care. After that, I will introduce human dimensions and then explain how these two subjects connect. Finally, I will discuss various actions we can take to get more involved and help pollinators. Since you signed up for this webinar through Xerces, you likely have more knowledge or interest than most about invertebrate species, and specifically pollinators. Even so, here's a brief overview on them. Pollinators are animals that assist in the cross-pollination and eventual reproduction of flowering species. Globally, there are over 200,000 animal pollinator species, the majority of which are invertebrates. Examples of native insect pollinators in the United States include bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, and flies. Bees are normally the first kind of pollinators people think about, so let's talk about them for a moment. There are over 3,600 species of native bees in North America. Here, I've pictured some that you may have seen in your own yards or in your own hikes or vacations that you go on. You can see a bumblebee in the top left, a mason bee in the bottom left, a sweat bee in the bottom middle, a carpenter bee on the bottom right, and I've also included a picture of a honeybee for your reference in the top middle. Most people automatically think of honeybees when they think of pollinators. And although honeybees are very important for our food security, they are managed non-native species in the United States, making them more like livestock. Honeybees are usually housed by beekeepers and moved around the United States to use their ecosystem service of pollination and to collect their honey. Many native bees are excellent pollinators and are more efficient than honeybees because of their anatomy and some of the techniques they use, such as buzz pollination. The good news is, regardless of what pollinator you're interested in, the practices used to benefit them will support them all. For your frame of reference, when I talk about pollinators moving forward, I will be referring to native insect pollinators. Pollinator species have been in decline over the past few decades for a number of reasons. Habitat loss and fragmentation is a main reason for decline and includes things such as loss of prairie and other early successional habitat because of increased agriculture and urban sprawl. Chemical use is another main reason for decline that has resulted from overuse of the land and increase of monocultures, both of which have increased nutrient input and the use of non-targeted pesticides. Parasites and pathogens, such as the varroa mite and nosema, are another reason for decline. And although they primarily affect honeybees, they can spread to and affect native bees. Climate change is another reason for decline because it can cause a timing mismatch of pollinators and the plants that co-evolve together. For example, pollinators may become active before their early food sources are ready, which will adversely affect both. Beyond the individual stressors, a combination of them can create further issues. For example, decreased health from exposure to pesticides may allow for greater damage from parasites because bees are already weakened. Finally, it is challenging to earn protection from the Endangered Species Act because of deficient data and associations with insects being pests. For example, the Center for Biological Diversity published a study in 2017 of native bees in North America, and found 24% to be imperiled and 52% to be in decline of the data sufficient species. And I put those in air quotes because this was about 1,400 species of bees. And as I mentioned, we have close to 4,000. So it doesn't even cover all of the species of bees we have in the country and in North America. So far, you've heard a little bit about different types of pollinators and some reasons of their decline, but you may be wondering, why should we care? Well, there are many reasons why we should care about pollinators, the first of which affects us all on a daily basis. Do you start your day with a cup of coffee or finish it with some chocolate? If so, you should thank a pollinator. We can thank pollinators for about 1/3 of the bites of food we take each day, including many highly nutritious foods such as fruits and vegetables. Pollinators also affect the bottom line of industries in the country, like blueberries and almonds. The US is the largest producer of almonds in the world, with our almond industry worth about $11 billion. And about half of the United States honeybees are brought to California each year for the bloom. With honeybee health concerns like colony collapse disorder and increased parasite loads, native pollinators are becoming even more essential. Some native bees are more efficient, like bumblebees with their buzz pollination, and they tend to visit more flowers, making their continued presence in the landscape essential. Two other reasons why we should care about pollinators are biodiversity and cultural connections. Plants rely on pollinators and vice versa because these species co-evolve together. About 90% of flowering species worldwide need pollinators. Pollinators also play important roles in the food web with both direct and indirect effects. For direct effects, pollinators are prey for many species, as caterpillars and larvae provide great protein and fat sources for other wildlife like birds. For example, one study showed that between 6,200 and 10,300 caterpillars may be necessary to raise a single clutch of chickadees. They are also eaten by other birds of interest like turkeys and quail. So, pollinators are essential to anyone who enjoys bird watching or hunting. For indirect effects, pollinators assist with seed and berry production, which are then eaten by countless wildlife species, providing another important connection for any wildlife hunters or watchers. Do any of you remember chasing bees and butterflies when you were younger? I know I remember, and that's where my love for the natural world began. Pollinators provide important cultural significance as an early connection to nature for children, and this connection is essential to protect and maintain. One thing people have seemed to notice over the last few decades is a large decrease in the amount of bugs that hit their windshields while they're driving. Lesser insects likely means a decrease in habitat quality and quantity, or more fragmentation, so they can serve as what we call an indicator species. This is sort of like a canary in the coal mine example, if you've heard of that. Everything in nature is connected. Pollinators can act like an indicator species because as their habitat declines, so do they. Degrading habitat has a rippling effect through ecosystems. Pollinator habitat is also used by other beneficial insects, such as predatory species, and is preferred by other wildlife species, such as bobwhite quail, which means a multitude of species and activities, such as farming and hunting, can be affected. So far, I've shared with you a few reasons why we should care about pollinators, such as because we like to eat, we appreciate other species, and we want to support ecosystem health and function. Even though we know of these benefits and of the importance of pollinators, we still do not have the level of support we need to ensure their health and continuance. The question is, why not? There have been countless studies over the past few decades focused on pollinators, which have generated incredibly valuable information regarding their needs, causes of declines, and recommendations for action. However, there still exists a missing step between knowledge and action. And it is exactly that step that I studied for my PhD and the one I'm going to share with you now. Let's play a game. I really wish this was in person, but I hope that you'll participate anyway, even though I can't see you. So now I'm going to ask you some questions and I hope that you will answer them in your head, or as long as you're on mute, you can answer them out loud, or maybe ask people that you're with. First group of questions. Do you own a car? How long have you owned that car? Do you think your car is ugly or beautiful? Second group of questions. Do you have an iPhone? Do you agree or disagree with this statement? I feel like my friends want me to have the newest iPhone. Third group of questions. How many hours a week do you participate in outdoor activities? Do you agree or disagree with this statement? I intend to take a walk in nature on the next warm day. These seem like simple questions, right? Well, if I was presenting on this topic in person and able to actually hear your answers, I would better understand things about you, like your personal preferences, attitudes, normative pressures, and intentions. All of these relate to elements I study called human dimensions. There are many definitions for human dimensions, but a simple and relevant one for this discussion is elements related to human action and choice. These elements can include people's attitudes, behaviors, intentions, knowledge, values, beliefs, and the list goes on. The ones that I have on the screen are just a snapshot of what we can look into. Human dimensions are useful because they can be informative for a variety of efforts, from improving support options to encouraging behavioral changes. Human dimensions are something that has been researched in the conservation field for decades, typically to understand how and why humans value natural resources, how they want them managed, and how humans are affecting or affected by natural resource management decisions. However, most research and efforts in conservation are still focused mainly on the biological and ecological components, without strongly considering social science components. The majority of conservation research and application efforts focus on the two right circles in this image, wildlife and habitat. Although the information gathered from these efforts is incredibly valuable, they are only two parts of the conservation puzzle. Humans provide an essential third component to conservation efforts. While it is only one component, there are many things we need to consider. Sociological considerations, such as how people relate to or are influenced by others. Psychological considerations, such as people's internal influences or attributes, like their attitudes. Economic considerations, for example, what is their income? Availability of funds influences people's decisions and ability to act. Demographic considerations, for example, what is their age, education level, race and ethnicity? Where do they live? All of these can influence people's decisions and ability to act as well. The question is, how do we connect these human dimensions to pollinator conservation efforts? The answer is, we can connect them through conservation social science research, which includes these human dimensions. Here is a typical human dimension study design. First, we want to focus on the topic of interest, such as a species, conservation practice, or habitat. Second, we want to decide on our study group. Are we interested in landowners, recreationists, or maybe the general public? Third, we want to decide on our survey approach. Are we going to interview people in person or conduct telephone, mail, or web surveys? Perhaps we're interested in doing a mixed method study, which involves a mixture of these survey types. Fourth, we will need to develop or use an established questionnaire. These questions will be related to our topic of interest and study group. These questions may regard an individual's attitudes, behaviors, satisfaction levels, quantity of catch, or trips to national parks. And again, they will be focused on that topic of interest. Finally, we will conduct the survey and collect and analyze the results. We are often looking for practical advances in the field of conservation, including information that can be generalized to the larger population, or provide new insights, or develop new recommendations for natural resource agents. Oops, sorry, touchy mouse. While I was at Mississippi State University, I joined these two subjects by focusing my dissertation research on the human dimensions of pollinator conservation. My topic of interest was pollinator conservation, specifically the adoption of best management practices, or BMPs. These included habitat-focused practices, such as planting nectar species and creating field borders, and chemical-focused practices, such as using targeted herbicides and adjusting pesticide application timing. My study group was Mississippi landholders who held at least 25 acres of contiguous land. I refer to them as landholders instead of owners because we wanted to ask them to answer the survey even if they were a renter or manager of the property, because they still had influence on the practices that could be adopted. My survey was a mail survey because I had physical property addresses from a tax record database. I had to design my own questionnaire because none previously existed. I used theories to develop questions related to landholder attitudes, social norms, conservation practice behavior, perceived behavioral control, knowledge, and intentions to use pollinator BMPs on their land in the future. By asking these specific questions, I was better able to understand the landholder and what was influencing their decision of whether or not to participate in pollinator conservation efforts on their lands. Based on my results, I was able to provide methodological advances for this type of survey research, and I developed recommendations for future targeted pollinator conservation efforts, which I will cover in a few minutes. For those of you that really love digging into the methodology of studies, here's some more information, but please don't be overwhelmed by it. My survey study was sent to 4,000 Mississippi landholders. To develop the questionnaire, I used the theory of planned behavior and diffusion of innovation theory. On the image on the bottom of the screen, you can see the main constructs or study areas that are used in the theory of planned behavior research, including people's attitudes, injunctive norms, which is a type of social norm related to how people feel others think they should act, perceived behavioral control, which are perceived constraints like resources, time, or skills, and intentions. In the top of the image, you can actually see the front of my survey cover and an accompanying leaflet that I developed. This leaflet provided information on pollinators and some plant species that will benefit them, along with the description of the 9 pollinator best management practices I referenced in the survey. I used a variety of data analysis techniques to test the reliability and validity of the questionnaire, to determine the strength of the influences on intentions to adopt pollinator BMPs, and to compare adopter groups. The next 2 slides show some of the data analysis and results that went into testing and refining my questionnaire, which is also known as a measurement instrument. My intent of showing these slides is not to bog you down with the jargon or to give you a crash course in survey building and testing. It is simply to show that human dimension surveying is about more than asking some simple random questions. There is a method and a bit of a madness that goes into creating these. The questions you ask and the data you collect and analyze will be dependent on what you are hoping to do with the results. For instance, if you're hoping to provide recommendations for future conservation efforts based on past behavior, you need to capture information about that past behavior and determine potential influences on future behavior, which is something I was interested in for my study. As I mentioned, no previous questionnaire existed for my topic of interest, so I had to develop and test it myself. The steps shown here cover that process, starting with developing an initial questionnaire that I then pre-tested with landholders and academics before sending the final version. Mail surveys are a dying breed, unfortunately. As you all know, you probably get very inundated with flyers or junk mail or whatever else, so it's hard to get people to respond to them. However, we had a surprisingly high response rate to my survey, which allowed us for it to be large enough to split into 2 subsamples. This allowed me to test the measurement instrument twice. First, in an exploratory capacity, which allowed me to refine it, and then second, in a confirmatory way. The purpose of my analysis methods was twofold. First, I wanted to test the measurement instrument I developed to make sure that it showed evidence of reliability and validity. Second, I wanted to actually use the results from the analysis to inform future pollinator conservation efforts. If the first part of this testing failed, then I could not perform the second part. This goes back to the importance of asking good questions, not random questions. And these types of tests will prove whether or not they were good or random. Our results are only as good as the data we collect. So spending a lot of time preparing a human dimension survey is essential to pave the way for success later on. But enough about this now. Let's get into some results. One important initial finding was the distinction between habitat and chemical best management practices, also known as indicators in the analysis. To study the nuances of this distinction, I split out the habitat and chemical indicators into 2 different models, which I then explored using the theory of planned behavior constructs I previously introduced. This differentiation of the best management practices is crucial for future engagement and adoption efforts. For example, there is a strong stigma regarding the use of chemicals that has been growing with the desire to improve environmental quality and to use non-GMO crops. I found that landowners differentiated between habitat and chemical indicators regarding the attitudinal and normative constructs. This finding indicates that normative pressures, like those pressures received from others around you, may have more influence on intentions to adopt chemical rather than habitat BMPs. Ultimately, the promotional effectiveness of pollinator BMPs may vary depending on the type of practice and the landholder's belief. This means that understanding the biology and ecology of pollinators and their habitat is not enough. We need to understand the human dimensions as well, because it will influence the amount of conservation efforts we can implement on the landscape, especially on private lands. Here are a few more results from my research. I asked some questions related to landholder behaviors to understand if they were currently using pollinator best management practices, or BMPs, if they previously used them, or if they had never used them. This allowed me to break them into adopter groups, which I use for later comparisons. Based on the behavior questions, I found that 63.7% of respondents had adopted at least one pollinator BMP. And of those, 33.7% were current adopters, 30% were previous adopters, and the remaining 36-ish% were non-adopters. I used structural equation modeling approach to investigate the 3 theory of planned behavior attributes listed here on the top left. For this analysis, I calculated all of the relationship values simultaneously and found that they all positively influenced intentions to adopt pollinator BMPs. The strongest influence came from perceived behavioral control. This finding means that even if people have favorable attitudes and social norm pressures to use pollinator BMPs, they still may not adopt them if they do not feel they have enough skills, time, or resources. This result was further supported when I compared adopter types, which you can see on the bottom of the screen. I found that current adopters reported higher knowledge and communication channel use than previous adopters and non-adopters. This result indicates that the latter 2 groups may be facing higher constraints and are less connected, meaning that we cannot support all types of people with one approach. So, how do we address this? In my opinion, anyhow, we can address this using this 2-step approach. Think about the last time you really learned something that you retained for a while. Did it occur after trying something brand new once? Probably not. You probably read the instructions or was taught by someone else, and then did it on your own a few times. This repeated exposure to information and the actions themselves meant that you better retained the information and built some knowledge. You may also have become more committed to the action because you wanted to continue and see it succeed, right? These are types of things that these two steps tap into. First, we need to develop more targeted messaging of pollinator BMP specifics. Sorry, what was that? Well, right now we're flooded with information about things. So it helps with our awareness, but that does not necessarily increase our knowledge. We need to provide more detailed information about these pollinator BMPs so landholders can become more familiar with them. This information can include things like BMP costs, their multiple benefits, and their implementation details. Second, we need to further increase this familiarity by providing opportunities for people to observe BMP demonstration areas on the landscape, to practice skills themselves, and to connect with others interested in pollinator conservation. These would allow for more group learning, skill building, and the formation of social networks. For example, think about this presentation today. I have been throwing a lot of information at you, but probably not all of it will stick. There would probably be a better chance of it sticking if I had given this presentation outside in a garden, where I could show you some examples of pollinators visiting flowers, or where you could see cover crops on the lands, or if you had a chance to plant something yourself, versus you just listening to me through a screen. The mind-hand connection is strong and incredibly useful when learning and integrating knowledge. Now that you have learned all about human dimensions, we can start the quiz. Wait, I guess I forgot to give the quiz to Rachel. So how about we just do this? Take a breath, take a stretch. I wanted to build in just a short little break here, just because, again, I live my life on Zoom, and I know it can be a lot to take in a lot of information. Perhaps some of you are checking your email right now, your cell phone. So I thought it would be good just to take a short break for a second to breathe, stretch, maybe take some water. And you should consider yourself lucky, because if we were in person, I'd probably make you stand up and do some jumping jacks with me right now. So instead, I will cheers you with some water, and then we'll keep going forward. And maybe this pause will bring your attention back if I've lost you. All right. So now, to further solidify the importance of human dimensions of pollinator conservation, we need to talk about the actions we can take to get more involved. As I previously mentioned, a person's attitudes, normative pressures, knowledge, and perceived behavioral control can all influence their intentions to adopt pollinator BMPs. But their choices have other influences as well, including their location, land holding size, and need for additional support. Just like a one size does not fit all, a one conservation approach does not fit all either. When it comes to pollinator conservation, it is important to know your options. While there are some basic steps to creating pollinator habitat, more specific steps will vary based on the type of property, the size, and the location. There are also some financial and technical support options that may be of interest to you. So let's dive in and cover some of these now. When it comes to the creation of pollinator habitat, I like to ask 5 questions: who, what, where, when, and how. The first question relates to who. Who do you want to support? Is there a certain type of pollinator you want to see and help? If so, the pollinator may have specific nesting or host plant needs you will need to consider. For example, if you want to support solitary ground nesting bees, then you will want to make sure you are not covering every inch of the ground with seed and plants. There will need to be some bare ground nearby. If you want to support monarch butterflies, you will need to make sure you have some milkweed available, like for this little caterpillar you see on this picture. What is the next question? What type of habitat are you looking to create? Perhaps a simple garden, a field border, or a field of wildflowers. This links into the size of it as well. You will need to know the size to know how much seed and or how many plants to purchase. Location is key as well, which brings us to our where question. Will this be an isolated patch or something you can connect within a community? Will it be next to an agricultural field? If so, you may need to consider chemical drift. Will it be near a forested area and quickly outshaded once trees grow? It is important to think about how the space will look in a few years as well, since you will be putting in valuable time and money to get it started and established. Once you decide on the who, the species, the what, type of habitat, the where, sizing and location, when is when you start sourcing the flowers and other habitat essentials, such as shrubs and trees if you prefer, and other elements like maybe a puddling area or some twigs for nesting material. The when is also important because you need to remember that these gardens and spaces need time to get started and grow into their own. They may not look like the ideal space you have in your mind in the first year, and they're going to need help to establish. Which brings us to the how. Especially if you are looking for a more manicured garden look, you will need to have a maintenance plan, including increased watering and weeding the first year. If you are designing these spaces to help pollinators, it will be important to not use chemicals to manage them. It may be more labor intensive the first year to maintain the space, but once they get established, the plant should be hardy and the maintenance demand should lessen. But this again depends on the type of habitat you're looking to create and the species you include. If you have a small property or live in a more urban area, there are some specific options and practices you can use. Smaller gardens can still benefit pollinators, and even if you are in an urban area, you will still attract them. Raised beds and window boxes are great options, especially if you're just getting started. Creating adjacent food and pollinator gardens are a great option to grow both healthy food and support wildlife. When creating vegetable gardens, you can use some companion plants to increase their chances of success. For food and pollinator gardens, you could include alyssum, bee balm, and rosemary. Also allowing dill, oregano, thyme, and sage to flower will help pollinators. By planting these gardens near each other, you will be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor, both figuratively and literally. It's always best to plant native, but some people want more out of their gardens for fear that they will look like unkempt patches of weeds. It is important to encourage people to avoid invasive plants, and by that, I mean those that spread and either create competition or degrade the soil for other native plants so they cannot survive. Butterfly bush is one of those plants that would be best avoided as no native caterpillar species use it as a host, and it can degrade the soil for other plants. Options you could use instead would be planting butterfly weed, purple passion flower, or narrowleaf sunflower. Remember when planting to use the rule of 3. It is beneficial to plant at least 3 plants for the 3 different foraging seasons, spring, summer, and fall, to make sure there's continuous food available for our pollinating friends. Bee lawns are starting to become more popular in discussion and practice. Essentially, they are a mixture of traditional lawn turf grass with low-growing perennials like clover that continue to bloom after mowing. This turns lawn deserts into lawn buffets for pollinators. A not so fun fact about lawns comes from a study in 2005 published in Environmental Management that estimated there are about 40 million acres of turf grass in the United States. It is technically the US's most irrigated crop as well. Bottom line, there will be multiple benefits from creating more bee lawns across the country. If you have a larger property or live in a more rural area, you can use each of the options and practices previously outlined, plus a few more. You may have the ability to create more habitat by planting larger gardens, creating field borders, or converting fallow fields to wildflower prairies. Altering your management of the land can also benefit pollinators, such as reducing your mowing frequency and using prescribed fire on sections of your lands on a rotating basis. This can help promote the early successional habitat pollinators need. Reducing chemical use is another great way to support pollinators on larger property. Avoiding blanket application of chemicals, either by using targeted herbicides or at least identifying issues before applying, is essential. Larger landholdings that may provide ideal habitat for pollinators may be eligible for support from various conservation programs like those in the Farm Bill, which I will briefly cover soon. Beyond the actions I have covered so far, there are even more specific pollinator BMPs for owners of working lands, like those for agriculture and timber. I have several practices listed here on the screen that may benefit you if you are this landholder type. Many of these practices are not necessarily specifically targeted for pollinators, but they will benefit them. This is one of the positives of promoting these types of practices among various landholders because their impacts are multifaceted. For example, perhaps you are interested in reducing the erosion on your land, so you decide to plant cover crops. Not only will that help you with your primary interest or concern, but it can provide a beneficial food source to pollinators. Additionally, there are specific support options that can be pursued if you are a working lands owner. As I mentioned previously, financial constraints may keep more people from getting involved with pollinator conservation, but technical constraints, such as those related to resources or skills, may also reduce the adoption of pollinator BMPs. This was something that came to light in my study. To address this, there are currently several financial and technical support options like those listed here, but this is not an exhaustive list. The Farm Bill contains many environmental programs that can assist with supporting the creation of pollinator habitat on your lands. The first one listed here is the Conservation Reserve Program. This program provides technical and financial assistance to eligible farmers and ranchers to address soil, water, and related natural resource concerns on their lands. It encourages farmers to convert highly erodible cropland or other environmentally sensitive acreage to vegetative cover, such as native grasses, wildflower or wildlife plantings, trees, and riparian buffers. There are specific practices within this program that can benefit pollinators, including CP2, which is native grass forb and legume establishment, CP29, which is a wildlife habitat buffer for marginal pasture, CP33, which is upland bird habitat buffer, and CP42, which is specifically pollinator habitat establishment. The second one listed here, the Conservation Stewardship Program, helps agriculture producers maintain and improve their existing conservation systems and encourages the adoption of additional conservation practices to address priority resource concerns. This program has a specific focus on wildlife, including enhancements of added monarch butterfly and other pollinator and beneficial insect habitat in croplands, rangelands, forestlands, and wetland areas. The third one listed is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. This also provides financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers to address some natural resource issues. There's also beneficial practices in this that get promoted, including field borders, hedgerow plantings, reduced tillage, integrated pest management, and early successional habitat development. In addition to these Farm Bill programs, there are several partnership programs and ongoing conservation workshops that can provide additional technical support to those wanting to learn more and get involved with pollinator conservation. The Xerces Society is a leader in this realm by providing more landowner support each year. They have incredible resources on their website, which I will point out in a few minutes, should you wish to learn more and take the next step. I heard once that we only remember about 4% of what we hear. So, if nothing else, this is the 4% I hope you take away from today. Pollinators are animals that assist in plant reproduction, mainly insects like bees, butterflies, beetles, and others, and they are in decline for several reasons, including habitat loss, increased chemical use, and climate change. There are various individual and organizational efforts ongoing to help pollinators, but we need to get more people involved, which is why it is important to talk about the human dimensions of pollinator conservation. Human dimensions are elements related to human choice and action, like people's attitudes, knowledge, beliefs, constraints, behaviors, and the list goes on. One way these two subjects can be connected is through human dimensions research, such as the study I conducted focused on the adoption of pollinator best management practices. Humans are the third component of the conservation puzzle, along with wildlife and habitat. And it is the one component that needs more consideration moving forward. Pollinator conservation and human dimensions are connected because the more we learn about people, the more we can improve our conservation efforts by targeting specific topics on which people need more support. This can include increasing knowledge, improving skills, or providing direct connections between people and nature. You play an essential role in conservation and deserve stronger consideration in the future. You can get involved in pollinator conservation in several ways, from creating small pollinator gardens at home, to changing how you manage your large property, and even to teaching your friends and neighbors more about what you have learned and what you're doing to start creating new social norms and actions that will benefit our pollinator friends. If more of us get involved in these actions, then we can change the human role in pollinator conservation from problem to solution. I've listed 4 links here for the components that I referenced earlier, should you wish to learn more or dig further. Feel free to take a screenshot, but I also believe this recording will be available later. The first 2 are references to the studies that I mentioned. First, the Center for Biological Diversity study regarding the bee populations, and second, the study regarding the turf grasses in the United States. The third is a reference to my first dissertation paper that covers some of the methods and results I shared today, should you wish to dig deeper and learn even more. And the fourth is an outreach publication I developed for Xerces to summarize my research, should you just want the high points. Further information can be found at each of these links if you want to learn more. And finally, here are some resources. I know that we've covered a lot of ground in the past 40 minutes, and I didn't want to leave you hanging. So here are some beneficial resources to keep you going on your pollinator conservation journey. The first is a link to Xerces Pollinator Conservation Resource Center. Here you will find a plethora of information, including region-specific items and planting guides. The second link is that to a document showing how specific farm bill programs can be used to support pollinator conservation. This may be helpful if you are that type of landowner and you think you can get support from these programs. The third link is that to the Land Conservation Assistance Network, which is a comprehensive resource for landowners who want to make more responsible and sustainable decisions regarding the future use of their lands. You may find further support through this network as well. Finally, the fourth link is for Xerces publications, which have been essential in my learning and teaching about pollinators over the past few years. I highly recommend each of the books pictured here, along with the additional publications that they have on their website. And with that, I would like to thank you again for your time, attention, and energy today. I know it's a lot to sit through these webinars when you already probably work from home virtually or spend the majority of your day on your computer. So I thank you very much for showing up today. I hope today's presentation was informative and beneficial in some way. And I hope it at least made you feel that you should be more considered in conservation. And I wish you all the best with your future efforts. With that, I would love to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We did have a few people ask about those links, so I will put those links in the YouTube video that will be on our YouTube channel, hopefully either by tomorrow or by early next week. So we do have a few questions. The first question was, what about wasps and really their role as pollinators?
It's hard to generalize. We should never generalize, right? So wasps, to my knowledge, can be pollinators. But when it comes to specifics of species, I must admit, and should have in the beginning, I am not an entomologist. So if you want to learn more about that, I am sure Xerces has information about wasps as pollinators. And I don't know, Rachel, if we've got any of our wonderful entomology staff on.
We do, I think. Let me see who is on. But people can always check our website as well. Like you said, some wasps are pollinators, but they don't purposefully pollinate like bees do, because bees do collect pollen for their offspring.
Right. And with their anatomy, they're normally not as efficient because, bees are more fuzzy. So, and they have those pollen baskets, some of them on their hind legs, so they can collect more pollen and be a more efficient pollinator than a wasp. That's generally how you can tell the difference. If you look at them, they're less fuzzy, less furry, but they can still do it. They go flower to flower.
All right, we can move on to the next question. Someone was asking if there are best management practices for pollinator conservation for urban landowners.
That's a great question. So I need to dig into this a little bit more. So that leaflet that I put together and the 9 practices that I used for the survey, I did not pull that from anywhere. That was simply from working in the pollinator conservation realm, seeing the types of practices that are beneficial for pollinators, and I kind of put that list together myself. But you can get those bits of information, again, from those Xerces books that I put up there. A lot of that information is in there. So as far as urban locations, best management practices there, I don't want to correctly state this, but I believe, to my knowledge, that there is a higher chemical use, or at least equivalent, in urban areas as there are in agricultural areas, which is surprising. But a lot of people use chemicals on their landscape. So I would say definitely best management practices for urban areas would be try to reduce your chemical use, especially if you have smaller gardens. I know it can take a lot of time to do manual manipulation, going out there and physically weeding, but it's much better to do that than applying chemicals. So that's something. And then just the creation of habitat. So some of those best management practices that I mentioned in my survey were that. It's like planting nectar species, planting host plant species. So that's something that can be done anywhere, especially in urban locations. But as far as if there's an actual printout, I'm not sure if that exists, but if it does, I will find it. And maybe Xerces has one already that I'm unaware of.
I'm putting a few different publications that we have that do cover just the basics of how to create pollinator habitat for urban settings. And we also have a few others. And Matthew, I did allow him to speak and he just unmuted himself. So I'm going to let him chime in here.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Matthew. I'm one of the Xerces staff. Yeah, I know the question was about urban best practices and so on. Rachel just put the link to our Bring Back the Pollinators page. And I would recommend that as the first place people should start. Our Bring Back the Pollinators campaign is based upon 3 principles of growing pollinator-friendly flowers to provide nectar and pollen, to make sure there are the nest sites for bees and the host plants for caterpillars, to avoid pesticides, and to share the word, i.e., talk to your neighbors, put a sign up explaining why your garden looks as beautiful as it does, and all that kind of stuff, which are all pretty simple steps, and there's no absolute right or wrong way of doing it. But if you can follow those, certainly follow the 3, the plants, the nest sites, and not using pesticides, then you will in time create a fantastic pollinator habitat. And those are just principles, and they can be adapted to anywhere. I mean, if you've got just a small urban garden, or a couple of acres in the suburbs, or you're a park manager, or you have a business campus, etc. If you follow those principles, it will help guide you in the right direction. We also have a lot of information on our site that will help fill in the gaps when you're looking for specific plants and all that kind of stuff. Another document we produced several years ago now are the set of guidelines called Pollinator Friendly Parks, and that was written specifically for urban suburban parks to try and help park managers. But again, the information in that can be adapted to urban areas everywhere. Although those guidelines are rather old now, and we're actually just in the latter stages of completing a revision, which will bring much more information and address some other issues in more detail, such as pesticide use on public spaces. So I hope that helps with answering those questions, and I can give more information if people want.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I did also put a few other publications about best management practices for pesticides, as well as a habitat assessment guide, which is kind of fun to do actually with kids and go out and see what's out there. So yeah, lots of information on our website. So we do have a few questions, folks just asking, especially with the human dimension aspect, how can you suggest that people talk to their neighbors or their friends that they're not really on board with all of this?
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think especially now during the days of COVID, to like get outside and stand in your yard, you can do it 6 feet apart from your neighbor and just talk about it. A lot of people also like to use signage if you are doing gardens in your property, and maybe it looks unruly compared to your neighbor's completely manicured yard, but signs can be really good, especially with people getting out and walking more often. You can read why you're doing it. And then you can also have that discussion with your neighbor to say, hey, have you seen this? Maybe they notice the insect activity that you have in your yard, because people love to see bees and butterflies for the most part. So maybe use that as a talking point to explain, I've planted species X, Y, and Z because they're good for pollinators. And also I've had to use less water in my yard. I've had to use less chemicals, and I've had to maintain it less. For me, with human dimensions, it's all trying to figure out, where is the person coming from? What are they most interested in? For me, I'm a nerd. I love nature. So pretty much as soon as you start talking about pollinators, you've got me, I'm hooked. But not everybody is that way. So for example, when I was doing this study in Mississippi, the majority of the crops that are down there, their top commodity crops, are not pollinated crops. So we were really expecting a lot of these practices to not actually be used on the landscape. And we were blown away by the amount of interest in the survey and the amount of practices that were being adopted. But we recognized that some of these practices weren't necessarily being adopted for pollinators. Like quail, for example, is a very popular bird in Mississippi, and they need similar habitat to what pollinators need. So sometimes it's just trying to find that common ground. So whether it's with a neighbor in a more urban area, or maybe a neighbor in a more rural area, if you can find some of that common ground, or at least explain what you're doing and get people going, get that conversation going, that's how you can start changing some of those social norms, to getting people to realize, even if they don't do it themselves, they might be more accepting of what you're doing. And it starts a really cool conversation, which is what we really need more of regarding pollinator conservation. I hope that answers the question. If not, please let me know.
Thank you, Shannon. That was helpful. I did put a link in the chat for our sign, and it is part of our gift center, but you can also make your own. We have a lot of people that just make their own habitat signs, and that can draw people in too. So someone asked about the rule of 3 that I think you had mentioned.
Yeah, sure. So the rule of 3 is you want to plant at least 3 plants, 3 species if possible, for the 3 different seasons of the year. So pollinators need forage through spring, summer, and fall. And then they also, don't forget them in winter, they need some nesting habitat and area, but they're going to be actively looking for food for those 3 seasons. So it's really important. A lot of at least what I've noticed, a lot of the plants that show up that are either sold or promoted are summer species, which is great, but we also need to have some spring species and some fall species to make sure that we're covering that whole window of time. So that's what I mean when I refer to the rule of 3, is trying to have at least 3 different species or plants planted for the 3 different seasons. So like 9 in total, if you will, but the more the better, of course.
Thank you. I like this question. Was it possible to measure success of influencing landowners / renters regarding whether, after being exposed to more information and influence of their peers, neighbors, friends, did they increase their use of best management practices, and did anyone stop using pesticides?
That is a great question. So what you're actually referring to is what we call a longitudinal study. So it's when you actually do multiple surveys to see how behaviors have changed over time, especially once exposed to information or to people doing certain practices. Did your behavior change? Unfortunately, with this being a dissertation study, I had 3 years to figure this all out, and I had 1 shot at a survey. So I was not able to go back and resurvey everyone to see, did their behaviors change. And I want to do it, I would love to do it, especially when it comes to intentions, because that's an important distinction to make as well. Intentions do not equate to behavior, just like awareness does not equate to knowledge. So you may be aware of something, but you may not have the actual knowledge to do it. Just like you may intend to do something, but you may not actually do it. So having those follow-up surveys and those multiple touch points with people is very important. Unfortunately, I didn't do it with this study, but I like the question. You're right on the nose for the importance of following through to seeing how those behaviors change.
Great. So we do have a few questions about stubborn HOAs get rid of chemical applications to protect pollinators. Do you have any advice for folks on how to approach?
Yeah, so I don't know how influenced HOAs may be by bee cities, but here's another plug for a Xerces program. I think it's a lot has to do with the social norms. So especially with HOAs, you know, they want your yard to look a certain way, grass has to be a certain height, you could probably only plant certain species. It's really hard to change that social norm. So you can, I'm trying to remember, last year, I attended a webinar myself that was specifically focused on pollinators and HOAs. And I cannot remember what it was. If I can, I'll follow up with Rachel. But information probably exists. Maybe Xerces even has some themselves. But if you know your neighbors, it might be more difficult for you to go talk to your HOA alone. But if you know your neighbors and if you can get maybe a group of you to go talk to them, I think it all comes with the information. If you go to them and just say, hey, we want to do this, it might not be so successful. But if you can go in with pictures or with specifics, and then also, like I mentioned on those basic steps, that plan for maintenance. So you can kind of encourage them and let them know it's not that we're just going to be planting gardens and they're going to be haywire and look terrible. You know, that may be in your favor as well. But I know that this is a topic that's gaining more traction. So if information doesn't exist currently for how to approach HOAs, I guarantee you probably within the next few years, there will be more information. And Rachel, I'll defer to you. Does Xerces have anything on that topic?
Not specifically to HOAs. I don't know, Matthew, if you know of any publications that might be coming out, but I am sharing. I had a couple people. I'll let you answer, Matthew. I just saw you unmuted.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, we don't have anything on HOAs at the moment. It's one of those topics that I've been wanting to look into because I realized that there's not just HOAs, but also cities often have weed ordinances. And I personally, I don't see any reason why someone should be outlawed because they want to do pollinator gardening. But we've not yet had the capacity to really look into this so that we can understand, one, what the current rules are, and two, to come up with ways that might either, you know, to change and adjust the rules and the regulations that there are, or to help people, you know, do pollinator gardening that fits within, you know, it's almost like, is there something we can, like the spirit of the rules without necessarily being totally rigid? But so much of this has to come from local people. I mean, Xerces, you know, if you're a neighborhood HOA and suddenly you start getting contacted by a nationwide nonprofit, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to, at the local level, want to change. So I do think that this really is a kind of a grassroots movement. And I know grassroots seems like a bad pun, but I think that has to be the driving energy behind changing these very local rules and regulations, because so often, certainly with HOAs, it's what the neighborhood, what the community as a whole wants, and so you have to be able to change kind of hearts and minds at that local level. But unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have anything specific that we can offer. There is an organization called Wild Ones, and they've done a lot of great work over the years on exactly these issues, trying to you know, change weed ordinances and HOA rules and regulations. And I also know of some individuals who've worked. So, you know, there's one or two people I know who've, like, the HOA says you must have short mown grass. So they came up with a way by which they keep their grass at a length that would be acceptable to the HOA, but it isn't, you know, immaculate green lawn. So it doesn't fit with the stereotypical image of a lawn any longer, because it's full of flowers, but it was still considered to be mowable, so therefore would be acceptable to the HOA. But anyway, I'll stop talking and let everybody get on.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, we are right at time, and there are still a few questions that are coming in. Shannon, are you comfortable with me sharing your email address in the chat if people have specific questions for you?
Certainly.
Okay, I will go ahead and share that. Did you have any last words that you wanted to say, Shannon? We had a lot of really good questions, so please follow up with Shannon if you have them and you want to chat with her. She's great to talk to.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again. Like I said, I know we can all have computer burnout from being on it all the time. So I really appreciate you showing up today and listening. Hopefully you learned a little bit, take something away, maybe part of that 4%. And yeah, feel free to follow up with me after if you have more questions or comments or anything. Happy to help.